Let's take a look at the Zscaler APIs and functionality that is available for programmatic access and control and configuration of the Zero Trust Exchange. So we talked about the multiple levels within the Zscaler Zero Trust architecture, the central authority, the public service edges, and the logging clusters. The API sits at the central authority level, so everything that can be done in terms of applying policy or retrieving data, you access the API gateway. The API gateway will authenticate with the central authority. That might be the admin portal. So things we do in the browser are driven by API, but we also have the ability to use the APIs programmatically to control the authentication, control third-party partner API integrations. And our API gateway has all of that authentication, rate limiting, identity, and validation of the payload, logging, as well as that developer interface. Third-party integrations. There are source solutions that will integrate with Zscaler, threat intel analytics of the content, and make API calls back to Zscaler. Endpoint management solutions. CrowdStrike, VMware, Carbon Black, SentinelOne, identity solutions. API, in terms of SAML authentication, as well as SCIM authorization, is an API call. Data protection, that helps organizations safeguard their sensitive data across diverse environments. Or SD-WAN integrations, that enable SD-WAN providers to provide tokens, return that VPN or GRE tunnel information, and configure the SD-WAN solutions to connect to Zscaler. And then firewall management, in terms of the firewall centralization for the entire organization, and pushing configurations to Zscaler for the firewall policy. So API key management is part of the Zscaler solution. You'll see API keys for Zscaler Internet Access, API keys for Zscaler Private Access, Zscaler Digital Experience, and the mobile portal, each of which need to be configured because they're down to specific roles and responsibilities for those users. So what we're showing here is the API integration for cloud app security. We'll generate an API for Microsoft, for example, or for CrowdStrike, and you create that API key, pass it to the third party, and then they can make the calls from the third party into Zscaler based on the restrictions that are applied to that API key. So you create a single key per organization, and you do need to have a specific subscription for it. So with a Zscaler API key, you're going to generate an API token for Zscaler Internet Access, obfuscate the API key, post the API key to Zscaler, and then you'll get a JSession ID that you can use for subsequent calls for that cookie. API schemes, so you have API policy for your URL categorization, URL lookups, block list management, user management, admin log exports, SSL certificate management, rotate your SSL certificates. There's an API for generating those tunnels for IPsec tunnels, GRE tunnels, creating IP addresses. There's an API for Sandbox, as well as the cloud firewall configuration. One example of this is the CrowdStrike API, where we can correlate data between Zscaler and CrowdStrike, and we have the CrowdStrike sensor running on the endpoint. So, SD-WAN integration for API. We provide a list of all of the Zscaler IP addresses, which can be downloaded by the SD-WAN providers. The SD-WAN provider then logs into the Zscaler administration interface, now known as ZIA Admin Portal, through API, and will generate a VPN credential, identify the closest node based on the IP address of the SD-WAN router, use that credential then to register it as a location, and then use that credential to create the tunnels from the SD-WAN edge to the ZIA public service edges. Cloud Sandbox Submission API is available, so customers can submit their files directly to Zscaler, get their own intelligence, and return data based on the files that have been submitted through an API. It's easier to integrate with your existing workflows and provide an evaluation of the value that you are getting from Zscaler by saying, here are the files that have been submitted, these are the scores that came back for those files. So you can make a JSON query to the Sandbox API, returning back information about the files. You can search by MD5 hash, look across the different file types. That includes all of the information that you have about the file. So when the file was sent for analysis, how long did that analysis take? What was the URL for that file? What was the file type, the size, MD5, char1, char256 signatures, information about the digital signature of that file, and then where that file came from. And again, there are rate limits for this API to restrict the number of transactions that can be made per day. Zscaler provides APIs for firewall policies, create, update, and delete of all of the firewall rules. Simplifies migration if you are doing a move-in from an on-premises firewall to using the Zscaler Zero Trust Exchange as your outbound firewall. So Zscaler provides a full API for the cloud firewall. So this provides full create, read, update, and delete function firewall objects. Those firewall objects can be any of the firewall rules or any of those dependent objects or entities. And it's fully documented in the API framework with developer examples. One example is with our integration with Skybox. So you might have a policy for all of your locations. Skybox gives you visibility of the rules that apply for all of those objects, and then being able to extract those rules from your firewall and then push them to Zscaler and manage those firewall objects in Skybox as a central point of management reporting interface.